All right, school is in session. So take your seats and turn up the volume. It's time for the smartest fishing show on the internet. This is the show that dives into everything fishing, from tactics and gear to policy and product. Here he is, the fishing professor, Professor Sid Dobrin. So stick around, you might learn something.
Hey, welcome to the Inventive Fishing Professor Rodcast. I am Sid Dobrin, the fishing professor, and we have got a fantastic episode for you this week. But then again, don't we have a fantastic episode for you each week? So I'm thrilled to have in the Inshore-Offshore Digital Studio today, Jose Chavez of Z-Man Fishing Products. And Jose and I will be talking about some inshore fishing strategies and, of course, some of the great products from Z-Man. And during the much-needed and well-deserved Bourbon Break today, I'll be taking a look at Whistle Pig Rye. And after that, I'm going to count down my top 10 plugs for targeting redfish. And speaking of plugs, let me just plug the Rodcast a bit and ask each of you to please share the Rodcast with all of your fishing and drinking buddies. And you should also be sure to subscribe or follow the Rodcast by clicking that button that's on any of the platforms through which you listen to the Rodcast. Hey, welcome to the Rodcast. Let's get casting. All right. Well, we have got a heck of a guest today in the Inshore-Offshore Digital Studio because I am sitting here with Mr. Jose Chavez, the Director of Product Development for Z-Man. Now, for those of you who don't know Jose's name yet, let me just say that Jose Chavez is one of the most dynamic contemporary lure designers and angler experts in the industry. And before joining forces with Z-Man, Jose was designing and developing lures for brands like 13 Fishing and Savage Gear, and is known as one of the foremost up-and-coming lure designers in the industry. But I want to squash that reputation a bit and say that he is not one of the foremost up-and-coming designers in the industry, because there is nothing up-and-coming about his career. He is, in fact, one of the foremost designers already out there, established, sought after, period. And as testament to this, over the years, his lure designs have won multiple Best of awards at the annual ICAST New Product Showcase, one of the most prestigious awards for tackle manufacturers. Jose has also had a successful career as a tournament angler, both on bass tournament series and kayak angling tournaments. But after several years on the tournament circuit, he took some time off to focus on raising a family. But at the end of a 6-year break from tournament fishing in 2019, Jose stepped back into the tournament life and won the Angler of the Year points race in the Shenandoah division of Major League Fishing's Phoenix Bass Fishing League. But it's not just bass he knows. As a Florida West Coast angler, he has also become one of the foremost experts in saltwater fishing, both inshore and offshore. So today we're going to talk fishing with a true expert and one of the most genuinely nice guys I know in the industry. Jose, it is great to have you here. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on the Rodcast.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's quite the, it's kind of strange hearing the intro, but I guess a lot of stuff has happened in the past few years in the world of fishing. So, yeah, thanks for having me on board.
Oh, gladly. Glad to have you here. So we generally start each episode of the Rodcast conversation with a question about fishing origins. And your story is a bit different than many of those we have here on the show, but also among anglers in general. And if I've heard it correctly, you're from Morales, Guatemala, and it was your grandfather who introduced you to fishing, handlining for mojarras with your grandfather along the Rio Dulce, and he would take you to the Barrier Reef out at Belize. Could you tell us a little bit about the Jose Chavez fishing origin story and how that beginning really planted the fishing passion for you?
Yeah, totally. So I was, I can't even remember how old I was. It's one of some of my earliest memories, but I grew up in Guatemala in a town called Morales. And then my grandfather ran a convenience store right on the river. And so I remember going there quite a bit and just sitting at the dock in front of his shop and just like fishing the whole time, like all day. And that really kind of got me started. And then it was really with my uncle, who is my, grandfather's son, that my grandfather was really tied into his store. So he didn't really take a whole lot of time to go out on trips. My uncle would go once a year to fish the Barrier Reef. And, I think it was probably around the ages of 6 or 7 where he started taking me along. And, you know, as an adult, I look back at that and I say, wow, that's a really, you know, amazing investment that he made in taking a young kid fishing, because I have, you know, a 7-year-old now, and it changes the dynamic of your fishing trips when you're bringing a young person on board. So, I mean, I think between my grandfather getting me started and my uncle taking me on those trips to Belize, it really just turned me into like kind of like a fishing addict. And I never really stopped, you know, since then. I've been fishing basically my entire life. So it's been fun.
What a great experience. What kind of stuff did you target while you were fishing in Belize? Do you remember memorable catches?
Yeah, I mean, we were just the technical fishing that occurs there is a far cry from what happens here. So we would just get chicken rigs and like bottom fish, and I remember catching all sorts of, you know, different grouper species and snapper species, and we'd pull plugs behind the boat, and you'd run into like, you know, yellowfin tuna and barracudas, and every now and then a wahoo or some kingfish. But it was just a variety of stuff, and the you know, the bottom contours and the fishery of that reef are so insane that, you know, you just really had no idea what you were gonna. You knew that you had no idea what you're gonna get into, but you're gonna get into something. So it was cool. It was really cool. And then I remember the first trip as I was probably, like I said, 7 or 8, and we were pulling a plug, and we caught a black grouper that was, you know, probably in the 20 to 30 pound range. And I just remember being completely blown away by it. And it's just an amazing experience for a young kid. So it kind of set the foundation for everything moving forward.
Oh, what a great story. All right, so let's turn to your tournament career for a bit. Tell us how you got started tournament fishing, particularly in the MLF series.
So that's something I was going to bring up. I don't know if there's another Jose Chavez that did stuff in MLF, but that wasn't it wasn't me. My kind of inception in tournament fishing kind of started with some of the inshore tournaments that occurred here in Florida. So when I was 15, I ended up moving to the States, and at 16, I moved to Florida with my parents. And I started doing a bunch of kayak fishing. And I remember just kind of like wading out to a flat. Didn't have a boat or a kayak or anything, but I was wading out to a flat. And I knew there was going to be some redfish there in a particular oyster bar at a certain tide. And I was almost there. It was probably like a half-mile walk, you know, through the water and along the shoreline to get there. And this kayak flies by me, knocks out a couple of redfish in front of me, basically, before I got there. And by the time I got there, the bite was shut down. So I got it into like kayak forums and kayak fishing. And they had like these club tournaments from one of the kayak forums, and I started getting involved there, and then ended up fishing some more of the more competitive kayak tournaments, like, you know, Flats Masters and IFA, and then it kind of just progressed. I guess the peak of my tournament fishing was I ended up being one of Hobie's regional pro staffers and got invited to fish the Hobie Worlds. So I remember the first time we went to Australia to fish in the Hobie Worlds, I ended up leading day 1 and day 2, and on the last day I got knocked down to 4th place, which was kind of a bummer because I officially didn't place, but it was a really cool experience. But yeah, most of my tournament fishing is really local, you know, Florida, you know, inshore slam tournaments, catch, foot, and release. And then I did some of the catch, foot, and release bass tournaments as well, but and then the few events that I did the Hobie Worlds in Australia for year 1, and then they moved it to Texas for year 2, and I competed in both of those, it was really fun. You know, there's something about tournament fishing that makes you get a lot more granular about stuff, and like optimization, and you know, trying to improve your catch rate or what you're doing over, you know, the other people there. And I think that was really kind of formative in the whole process of, you know, lure development, because I think, you know, as anglers, some of us are like tinkerers. We like to cut things, glue things back together, glue split shots and weights and all sorts of stuff to things. And I think even the world of kayak fishing back then, when I first started, there were like, now people have like amazing kayaks that are completely like set up and tricked out and intuitively designed. Back then we were just bolting everything to our kayak ourselves or making it ourselves. So that kind of path of like, you know, creating your own your own solutions to issues that you encounter in fishing kind of, led really well to the way my mind thinks and kind of the fishing that I did. So it was cool.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand that. I've been kayak fishing and kayak tournament fishing on and off for the last 20 years. And I learned the same way, waiting East Beach at Fort DeSoto, and here comes the kayak or the John boat or Picnic Island or the clam bar under the Skyway, and, wanting that boat. And if you look, I've been fishing the same kayak for the last 20 years. And everybody makes fun of me for it because I've got PVC duct tape to it. It was never designed as a fishing kayak, but I made it into one. So yeah, that DIY kind of approach is there for a lot of kayak anglers from back then. You're talking about your experience in Australia doing the kayak fishing. If I read correctly, you finished 4th in the Hobie World Tournament when you were in Australia as the top international angler too. I mean, that was pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, it's just the locals got me after the 3rd day, but it was fun. It was Australians in general are just like really like animated, like happy, like fun people. And I remember the heckling that occurred amongst themselves that I was winning for the first couple of days. It was such a cool experience, and I still have a lot of friends that I met there that I still keep in touch with. But yeah, it was cool. I didn't expect to have that level of results. I was just trying to do the best that I could, and it worked for a couple of days. So
it was great experience. So I want to talk about Z-Man stuff today, clearly because of your role with Z-Man. And I know that even before you joined Z-Man, you were a big fan of the Z-Man chatterbait, and you've credited that chatterbait with a lot of your success. And you've also, I've read quotes where you've said that a lot of other anglers owe a lot of success to the Z-Man chatterbait. Talk to me about Z-Man's chatterbait and why it's such a powerful lure, particularly for tournament anglers.
Man, it's I think it's just an incredible tool for covering water and power fishing, and the drawing power to a chatterbait there's just something about that bait that I think that fish just gravitate towards, whether it's annoying them and they're reacting and trying to shut it up or something like it. No matter where you are in the country, kind of along with the Ned rig that Z-Man has as well. Like no matter where you are in the country, that's a tool that will really outperform just about anything in several. I'm not going to say most situations, but several situations. If you look at the results on tour now, whether people say it or not, you can see that their chatterbait is just a major part of their arsenal. So it's just, it's just an incredible bait that you can take everywhere and have success.
All right. So what would be your pro tip on when, where, and how to fish the chatterbait?
Yeah, so I tend to fish the chatterbait a lot around grass, and I think that's kind of typical I'm in Florida, right? So we have tons of vegetation. So I'm usually looking for hydrilla edges and just ripping it out of grass. And windy days, I think one of the things where chatterbaits kind of shine is if the wind kicks up a little bit and you got a little bit of kind of turbidity in the water, it's a bait that even you can catch fish doing a lot of things, but for some reason, the chatterbait specifically seems to outperform just about anything out there, and its ability to cover water is insane. So I would just say, if whenever you see a little bit of wind on the water, and a little bit of kind of silt, or the water's starting to kind of become a little dirty, or have a little more kind of texture to it, chatterbaits on wind-blown points or any place that the wind is causing some sort of a current or a little bit of movement of water is just an absolutely dynamite lure. So.
All right. So given that, and now you just said that, being based out of the, West Coast Florida area, and that you do inshore slam tournaments, talk to me about transitioning chatterbait from freshwater to targeting redfish, trout, snook, and how the chatterbait works as a saltwater bait.
Yeah, so honestly, my approach of it is really similar. It's an amazingly effective saltwater bait. I remember when the chatterbait first came up, and I looked at it and I was like, that thing looks kind of funky. I don't know about this. And then I was fishing with a friend, and they started just wearing out some redfish. with the chatterbait, and we were fishing an area in Safety Harbor that just has a lot of mud bottom with a little bit of kind of like scattered vegetation, and you'd find like a fish here, a fish there, but it wasn't like anything, no fish that were schooled up. So I was throwing a spoon and having some success with it, and then one of my buddies busted out just one of those chatterbaits that it's just the jig head and the blade, and you can put a plastic on it. I can't remember exactly. I think it's just labeled as a chatterbait by Z-Man. But it just, I think anytime you're searching for fish, especially again when the water's a little bit stained and you have a little bit of wind, it's just a phenomenal tool. It's really kind of replaced my using of gold spoons. And what I like about it a lot is that you can kind of let it sink and, fish it like a little bit deeper if you encounter some potholes, or you can kind of wind it and keep it up on the surface. It's just really versatile compared to like a spoon. Like I think they're really effective when they're bouncing bottom, but sometimes the cadence and the rhythm that you have to keep with a spoon doesn't necessarily align sometimes with the speed that the fish are looking for. And I think by having the flexibility of like adjusting your weight, whether you're fishing a quarter, 3/8, or a half on the flats, it works super well. So it's just like a great little search bait.
All right. Well, you used the phrase there, a funky looking bait. And so I got to hear your take then, since we're talking about chatterbaits and funky looking baits. Give me your take on the Hellraiser. I mean, this is a really unique design in a chatterbait. It's designed by Ron Davis. It's a hybrid bait, kind of chatterbait topwater, but it's almost got a stick bait or jerk bait design to it. Tell me about the Hellraiser.
Yeah, the Hellraiser is super cool. So I know when I first came on board with Z-Man, that first week I went to the office for the meeting and to just kind of meet the rest of the team, get an idea of where things were going with the product, and kind of have projects kind of getting started handed over to me, and just brainstorming new projects. And I saw this Hellraiser, and I was just like, oh, this thing looks crazy. Like it reminded me. It's got that kind of like, we were talking about like people tinkering and like creating things based off of necessity or curiosity, and it just looks like something that's been like masterminded in a garage or something like that, for lack of a better term. And I thought the same with the chatterbait when I saw it, but I've gotten to fish this Hellraiser quite a lot, and it's really impressive. Like it doesn't look like much when you see it out of the water and you're looking at it, but when you see it in the water, it's just it just clicks. You're just like, yep, this is gonna work. And it from what I found in the little bit that I fished it, and kind of talking to some of our pros that have gotten some time with it, I really think that it's going to have a niche where it really shines, which is when you have schooling bass. And when schooling bass are chasing down, bait, whether it's herring or whatever they're chasing down, because they're moving pretty fast. And with walking baits, you can't really cover water that fast. And then the like kind of like your whopper ploppers and other baits, they have a lot of resistance moving through the water. So it's not really like, I wouldn't say it's like the optimal presentation for that, application. But this Hellraiser, like it has very little resistance moving through the water. It causes a lot of commotion. I think, it throws a lot of flash with that rear blade in the back that, I think those fish are keying into like flashing and small bait near the surface. And it just has all the characteristics of something that they would be looking for. And the time that I've used it, it's been really great. So I really think that this is going to kind of like find a kind of a niche in a purpose in everyone's tackle box, is like something in their arsenal they can use for, these specific situations. And even in those situations that aren't, like spawning bass, busting fish on the surface. Like I've done a lot of fishing, like running, shorelines with it and weed lines, and it just gives you something totally different that the fish haven't seen, and and that they kind of react to. So I've had a lot of success with it. I'm impressed. And my initial thought when I saw it was like, whoa, what's happening here? But it's just with that tie point below the nose, and like you said, it kind of looks like a stick bait, but it's got this blade on the back, and then it sinks when it hits the water. But as soon as you start reeling it, it pops up to the surface and really starts that very tight, erratic side to side walking action that it has. And yeah, it's just a cool bait. The pictures and looking at it in person doesn't do it justice. You have to like you have to get it on the water and reel it a couple times, and then you're just like, whoa, like this is gonna be cool. This is gonna be something I'm gonna use. So
yeah, I think the first time I saw it, I thought, oh, somebody broke a devil's horse and tried to fix it by putting metal on the back end of it. But yeah, really different looking kind of lure, but I've been hearing good things about it. All right, so let's talk about Elastec, because I know that you're focused on Elastec plastics and that the Elastec line is an important part of the Z-Man portfolio. And Elastec's an interesting plastic technology in that Elastec contains no PVC, no plastisols, no phthalates, and it's non-toxic. Could you talk about Elastec and how it compares with other soft bodies, and what specifically is meant when Z-Man says the Elastec plastics are 10 times tougher than other plastics?
Yeah, totally. So Elastic is it's a pretty amazing elastomer that like you said, is incredibly durable. And just to kind of get into why I think it just, from a perspective of an angler, like a lot of times when we're out fishing, the action, there's good action, and then you cast out, you hook a fish, you bring the fish back in, and your plastic's toast. So you got to dig through whether your tackle bag's, handy, you got to dig through your tackle bag. You got to find another pack of plastics, or even, the time of just like reaching into your pocket, pulling out the pack and putting another lure on. The advantage of Elastic is that 10 times tough is probably an understatement, because I've caught, tens of fish on a single Elastic bait. And what I think is, really huge about it is that I never have to touch the bait at all. I rig it. One of the things I do is I put a little bit of the super glue gel on the jig head, and I slide it on, and that plastic is on there all day. So you can just focus on casting, hooking a fish. You're focusing on fishing instead of doing some of other, the subsidiary management that happens when you have to find your plastics, put another one on, and the action is going on. You can just release the fish, make a cast, hook another one, and just keep going. And in terms of the other thing that I think is really neat about Elastic is that we can make Elastic extremely soft, and that's a really good thing in terms of the action of the lure, and also the tactile experience that a fish has when they have it in their mouth. I think something soft is something they tend to equate more with a natural food, and they tend to hold it longer. So traditionally, if you're using plastisol or some of these other materials that are used for plastics, these really soft baits, a fish kind of interacts with it in a minimal way, and it will tear, and it just kind of enhances the the issue of having to continually change your plastics when you are, instead of focusing on your next cast and the fishing for the rest, what you're going to do with the next few minutes. So I think it gives us as anglers the ability to spend more time focused on fishing, and it also gives us the opportunity of using presentations in really soft plastic compositions that normally would kind of be a pain to fish with, but because of its durability, it kind of eliminates all of those problems. I do have to say it has some nuances in rigging, but there's a little bit of a learning curve there. But once you figure out, once you rig it a couple of times and you find out what jig heads or what hooks to use that work well, and Z-Man makes a lot of them. So I would say, if for anyone curious about trying Elastic or Z-Man, or I would highly suggest looking at the rigging tackle manager, the rigging solutions that Z-Man has made, because they've kind of done a great job in the past of tailoring those that terminal tackle to work well with the material. In terms of the other thing about it being phthalate free, yeah, it's in terms of if you have kids or even for your own health, there are things in plastisol that probably are not the healthiest or greatest things for you to be exposed to on a regular basis. And, all of that is a non-issue with Elastic. It's something that you just don't have to worry about that exposure at all, especially with kids in the house. And, sometimes they will handle baits and then they'll grab something and stick it in their mouths, or you stick their hands in their mouths. You're just a lot more at ease. Not that I encourage them to do that at all, but I just know that the risk for exposure isn't there.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I'm kind of curious about that non-toxicness, particularly because, we have seen over the last couple of years sort of an elevation from the environmentalist anti-plastic lure agenda coming up in legislation, particularly in, New England, and now, with the no lead and everything also. But, we're hearing talk about no plastics. And how does the non-toxic plastic then put Z-Man at kind of an advantage in that overall conversation?
Well, I think a lot of the things that people look at, when they look at the toxicity of plastics in general is like, some of the compounds that are made that kind of leach out of the plastic, or, the other part is that they, these soft plastics sink and they just get, become part of the sediment in the bottom. And, the beauty of elastic is one, that it floats. So if it were to get, dislodged from a hook, it's something that's easy to retrieve, and it just doesn't have any of those, toxic compounds that are used in production. So you're not really, worried about like leaching any of that into the environment. So I think that's another, like you said, another huge advantage of elastic. And before, in the past, before all this legislation started appearing, then maybe it wasn't such a notable, advantage. But I think as the government or the agencies that manage our fisheries get a little bit more conscious, or proactive on limiting exposure of the of limiting exposure that occurs from the plastics that people are using, and how it affects the environment. I think Z-Man will find a safe niche there, because it's something that has extremely minimal impact.
Excellent. So I want to go back to, we were talking about the toughness of this. You were with Savage Gear before coming to Z-Man, working with Mads, which also is another company that's turned out some incredible plastics over these last couple of years. And Mads and Savage Gear have talked a lot about their TPE, which are also really tough plastics. How do you think about Elastec compared not just with Savage TPE plastics, but TPE in general?
Yeah, so one of the things about Elastec is that Elastec is a form of TPE, and it's something that where I think it has the huge advantage is that Z-Man was kind of the pioneers of TPE. TPE was not popular at all or used in fishing much at all until they really got into it, and I think they've really done an amazing job at applying science and some of the resources that they had available to fine tune their formulation of elastic to be, kind of the softest in the market. So now that I am working here at Z-Man, it's really nice. So when you're referring to Savage Gear, so those TPE baits with Savage Gear, I was the one that brought them all in, with the exception of the shrimp, the original shrimp that Savage Gear had. I was the one that designed and brought all those baits to market here for the U.S. And, there's some clear advantages that we talked about of its durability. One of the limitations with all of this foreign TPE, and by foreign, I mean, Chinese produced, Korean produced, or even the Japanese TPE, is that there's a lot of limitations in the durometer of the plastic. And for those that I'm not familiar with durometers, so basically on how soft you can make it. Those limitations are really only, it's not a limitation at all with elastic. So the kind of the recipes that we have, and the kind of the knowledge that and the research that's been put into elastic and fine tuning elastic gives us a much broader window of what we can do with the product. And I think you'll notice too, if you're using some of the other TPEs that exist, they're a lot harder and a lot stiffer of material. And so it just it has a completely different, movement in the water and whatnot. But again, they are low toxicity. Also, they are, they have a lot of durability. I just think that Z-Man, given that they pioneered the plastic in the fishing industry through the resources and the amount of time they spent in, research and development, they are several generations ahead of some of the competitive formulations of TPE that are on the market.
All right. So given that, and your role as the lure designer, and your role in having designed award-winning lures. What kind of design elements will you be looking to work with the extended future Elaztec collection? So what's coming next?
Yeah. I can't get into too much detail of what's coming next. I think one of the things that kind of worked out well by me coming on board is that there's some, I've spent a lot of time working on a lot of very complex projects. And I think Z-Man's made a lot of also complex projects, but they're not quite at the level of complexity of some of the stuff we did with Savage here, with some of our swim baits and, some other things. So I think between that experience that we have making those complex baits and, seeing the available market opportunities that Z-Man has set forward, I think people are going to see a completely, different side of Z-Man moving forward in a good way. So it's going to be along the lines of what everybody remembers. But I think, the realm of possibilities of what we can do has kind of expanded past what we've seen Z-Man do in the past. We just have an amazing group of, pro anglers on board. It's some of the most talented I've ever worked with. And, between our team in South Carolina, who's just an amazing group of individuals there, I'm just honored to be, a part of that Z-Man family. We have a lot of really good ideas in the hopper that are going to be coming out here, and 2023 is where you'll see the first, designs that I've been working on that we will be bringing to market. So sorry, it wasn't really couldn't get into the nitty gritty of what we're doing next, but I think you'll see us kind of expand into some new areas that you haven't seen us into new markets where we haven't really played before. We will, and also strengthen some of the markets that we are already in. So there's going to be a nice mix of products kind of on the horizon soon.
Excellent. So let's stick with Z-Man. Let me ask you about some all the slew of spinner baits that Z-Man has, and given Z-Man's success in the bass market, the spinner baits that Z-Man turns out are freshwater targeted. But I was wondering about spinner baits on the saltwater side, since spinner baits for reds and trout have become so popular. Talk to me about Z-Man spinner baits, but targeting inshore species.
Yeah, totally. So they have a variety of products. I believe they have a spinnerbait also that's made for it. I'm sorry that I'm not super conversant yet on some of the names, but I think it's called the Bullseye spinnerbait. And they work really well. Spinnerbaits were popular for a while in saltwater, and I feel like they kind of phased out a little bit, and they're starting to come back now. But basically, it's kind of along the lines of the gold spoon, like that search bait that you have. But what's nice about spinnerbaits is the ability that you have to add a trailer to it. So you can add profile to the bait by using a larger trailer or a smaller trailer. You can kind of fine tune the color that you're using, so the presentation is a little bit more flexible than your standard, spoon presentation. And also, one of the things that's nice about spinner baits is they let you, again, by manipulating the trailer that you're using and the weight of the spinner bait, it lets you work the lure a lot slower than you would necessarily need to keep a spoon moving in order to be effective. And the other thing I found is that spinner baits, with spoons, you kind of have to bounce them. From my experience, you kind of have to make contact with the bottom periodically in order for them to work well, or they work the best from my experience when you're doing that. With spinner baits, you can kind of cover, higher up in the water column and still have some success. And then you can bump bottom as well as if you want and have success. So it just gives you more flexibility. So I see a lot of the high level tournament redfish guys, and you definitely see spinner baits in their boxes as something that they use. Again, it's kind of something that kind of became really popular, and that people kind of like, whether they stopped talking about it or it became a little bit less popular. When you look at the guys that competitively fish the redfish circuit in salt, they use spinner baits. So it's a cool tool that people maybe have kind of forgotten about a little bit, but it's not something to sleep on.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there about the customability and changing things out. I'm a big fan of Z-Man's TRD spins, which is basically how to add a willow blade or a Colorado blade to the back of a soft body. And I think that gives a lot of addition when you're working a jig head and a soft body. And it's just a neat way of adding that spin to the lure to give that visual flash.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so since I mentioned in saltwater again, let me jump back to Elastec for 1 second because we didn't talk about the easy shrimp. Talk to me about what's unique in the salt. I mean, this is a tough market. I mean, everybody and their brothers got a molded shrimp. You know, ever since Mark Nichols gave us the DOA shrimp or the cream shrimp or something. But what is it about Z-Man's easy shrimp that makes it unique within the soft body shrimp market?
Oh yeah, the easy shrimp is a really impressive lure. I'm a big fan specifically of the one that comes in loose bodies and you can put a jig head on. I think you can get a lot of it gives you a lot of flexibilities in presentation. So like if you and Mark has done an incredible job in the past. Mark's a good friend of mine, and I have nothing but respect for what he's done with the DOA shrimp. And he kind of paved the way for people to look at. Man, the shrimp lures are super effective, and it's something we need to look in. And Mark's lure came rigged with a kind of like an embedded hook and a weight on the belly. And so I think you see some different configurations of shrimp now. One that come with a EWG hook. That I know, Savage, and I think Voodoo makes a version of it. And then there's some other shrimps that have like a jig placed also that, Savage and Voodoo makes. But what makes the easy shrimp, in my opinion, stand out is that you can, with that single body, you can rig it, kind of like center weighted with the EWG hook. So it has a more horizontal angle of fall. So it's going to kind of stay in the water column better. It's going to go through grass better that way. Or you can put a jig head on it, and your choice of a jig head, and you can flip and pitch, skip docks really well, or you can lighten it up a little bit and fish potholes. So like, what's nice about it is that regardless of where you're at, you can take that shrimp and rig it to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I think the versatility of the easy shrimp is what really makes it stand out in that market. So it's something that I would say. What I fish now is there's always an easy shrimp tied on in my arsenal of rods that I carry with me. So
excellent. You ever fish easy shrimp under a popping cork?
Yeah. Not if I'm honest, the popping cork. I know it's super effective. It's not my favorite way to fish. So even when I go, to Louisiana or some of the nature coast or kind of that upper Florida panhandle coast, and people are killing it on popping corks. I'm one of those stubborn people that kind of I'd rather throw a chatterbait or try different things. But yeah, it's super effective under a popping cork. And to that point, like you could rig it under a popping cork. You could vary the amount of weight that you're rigging. Versus just having like a jig head and a hook. But yeah, it works super good on a popping cork. No offense to all the guys out there that love popping corks. I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers. I'm just saying, like, personally, it's just not my favorite way of doing it. So I'd rather take a few less fish and do it a different way than the popping cork, which when the popping cork is working, it seems to be that nothing out there can even come close to it. It's super effective.
Gotcha. Yeah, I have to say that among the companies that are producing popping corks right now, I'm seeing more and more of them making the arguments about why there's actually a popping cork war going on out there about whose popping cork is better. All right. So I want to get a pro build here. Let's imagine there's a new angler just getting into bass fishing and has the opportunity to get hold of a Plano box of Z-Man lures to kick off his or her bass fishing career. What are the 6 Z-Man lures that Jose Chavez puts in the next generation anglers kickoff box?
All right. So this is someone who's bass fishing or someone just fishing in general in freshwater? Sorry.
General freshwater. We'll go with that. Make it easier.
So one is got to be the Ned rig. Like whether you can go anywhere in the country. You can fish from the bank. You can fish from a boat. That TRD Ned rig setup it works everywhere. And even when the fishing gets tough, if you're amongst like really pressured fish, or it doesn't matter where it is, that thing just catches fish and works. I guess number two would probably be this micro finesse line. This micro finesse line of plastics is pretty amazing. We just did I was just over on the east coast of Florida doing some fishing with that for a video we were shooting, and we caught it's all from Bland, just walking canals and little lakes, and we caught peacocks, Oscars, Mayan cichlids, clown knifes, snook, crappie, bluegill. Like, so the number of game fish or just fish in general that are going to be willing to take a shot at one of these micro finesse baits is like it's huge. So if you're fishing like some of the larger profile baits specifically for bass, you're going to kind of be limited on what you can, what's going to try to eat that. But in terms of the micro finesse line for a new angler, especially, I think there's a little bit of a learning curve to getting into like, lure fishing. And a lot of people get discouraged when they don't necessarily get that much action or have that much success. And so I think, this also applies to the Ned rig. It's just one of those lures that a lot of stuff, whether it's a small fish, big fish, it's less selective, and it gives you kind of more positive feedback in your lure fishing, so you can feel more confident about it as a new angler, and also enjoy it a lot more instead of just being like, man, I tried this for a day and I didn't get a bite. It's kind of hard to do that with the micro finesse line or like the Ned rigs and not get some form of attempted murder by a fish on your plastic. So next it has to be the jackhammer or a chatterbait in general. Like that lure, a jackhammer, and I don't know if this counts or not, but I would throw in a razor shad and then a jerk shad with it. And those are kind of like the two different profiles that I tend to fish the most when I'm fishing, in freshwater and fishing a chatterbait. The razor shad kind of has more of like a large, bait fish profile. It's a lot taller. It hunts a little less when you're working that chatterbait through the water with the razor shad, but you can work at a little bit faster speeds. And then the jerk shad, kind of like a fine 5-inch jerk shad, is super effective too. It's a smaller profile. It has a little bit less resistance in the water. And it has a little bit more of like an erratic hunting action that also kind of triggers fish. So I think those, no matter where you are, you can just cast that out, slow reel it until you hit cover, and then just rip it out of the grass, and it's just, you get instant feedback if there are fish in the area.
Excellent.
Yeah, my next ones are I'm kind of biased, but I really like I do a lot of, or not a lot, I do a fair amount of like tarpon and snook fishing. And then the Z-Man mag swims has become probably one of my favorite, tarpon and snook baits. And I just pair it with like one of those diesel eye jig heads. I actually went out last night, so if I look a little tired, it's because I got home at like 6:45 in the morning from tarpon fishing. But we went out last night and caught a few fish, and the way these fish react to that mag swims is great. And one of the things that's interesting about tarpon in general is I feel like they like things that don't move a whole lot. They don't like aggressive kicking. They don't like jerky, erratic actions. And the mag swim, because it's so soft and long, it's a paddle tail swim bait, but it's a subtle paddle tail swim bait that works really well in the current. And it just has the right amount of movement to where you get a lot of cooperation from whether it's like snook or tarpon. I think that works really well. I know I just switched to saltwater on your freshwater thing, and
that's all right.
I'll partly blame my lack of sleep for that, but yeah, that's another one to not really sleep on. Yeah, but I think that kind of covers a good amount. The other one that people kind of don't fish a lot of, and I fish a lot of it maybe because I'm in Florida, is the turbo fatties, and that's just basically a very wide swimming worm basically that has a lot of kicking action. So like you can fish that through like lily pads and through cover on the surface with just the EWG hook, or if you put kind of like a bullet weight in the front of it, you can kind of, get it down in the grass or get it to the bottom and cover, different parts of the water column. Like you can even Texas rig it or, fish it a few different ways. And I think with those kind of baits, you kind of have a large amount of it covered. You're going to catch fish with that. You can cover the top of the water column. You can cover, you can do some search bait fishing. You can rip things out of grass, and you can target a wide variety of species. So it just kind of gives people a good mix of products to kind of get started with.
Excellent. I want to build that tackle box then. So Jose, this has been a great conversation, and I know that Daniel Nussbaum and Joey Prochaska and the rest of the Z-Man team are thrilled to have you on board. But before we say goodbye, we do have a traditional wrap-up question on the Rodcast. So let me ask you, given all your incredible experiences in angler and all your success as a lure designer, what's your grail fish? What's the bucket list fish that's still out there for you?
So right now, the fish that I've been working on for the past few years, and COVID kind of put an end to it for momentarily, but I think I'm going to start again, I want to catch a cubera over 80 pounds on like a popper or a stick bait. Wow. And I've probably hooked 6 or 7 of those. And they have shattered my dreams in ways that no one can explain, but like with really heavy tackle, like a 14,000 Stella, the drag, 100-pound braid, the drag completely locked down, like a heavy popping rod. I've hooked several of them in that category, and anywhere between 160 feet of water to 40 feet of water, and things that aren't supposed to break like, and if they don't break, they're just such powerful fish. They'll run you all the way to the bottom. And when they eat a popper, it sounds like someone dropped a engine block off of a helicopter or something like that. These are really massive fish, and having one eat 20 feet from the boat and run you straight down 160 feet straight into the rocks with not a single hesitation has kind of made me an addict over that fish. So that's kind of the one right now that I would like to really get off the list and catch. And the other one is a kind of a triple tail over 30 pounds. So I've caught a lot of them in the kind of the mid 20s. I haven't gotten one over 30 pounds. So I think that's another fish that I've kind of been working on. And it's something I'm going to spend some time early next month trying to do as well. But because the time of the year is basically now. But those are the 2 fish that are on my list of like, I have a target, I want to accomplish it. And, I'm going to keep working on that.
Oh, that is fantastic. Yeah, triple tail have become really popular lately. I'm seeing a lot more about people targeting triple tail. I think there was just a new IGFA women's fly fishing record set for triple tail too. So yeah, definitely a great target and a great bucket list. Jose, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today and for being on the Rodcast. I'm going to be eager, of course, to be seeing what comes next from Z-Man, and given your little bit of titillating, not telling us, but going to tell us there's new stuff coming, I'll be right in line at the new product showcase, waiting to see what the next Jose Chavez design brings us. So, Jose, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. And glad to have been on board for the podcast. So thanks for having me and taking the time to to listen to me talk about the stuff that I guess we're all addicted to.
Indeed. Addicted is the right word. Thanks, Jose. All right, it's that time. We're breaking. Not breaking bad, not breaking 2 electric boogaloo, not breaking balls, not even breaking bread. So nothing too back breaking. We're just taking a bourbon break. And during this week's Achy Breaky, I want to pontificate upon Whistle Pig Rye, specifically the 10-year small batch, not the 12-year or the 15-year, both of which admittedly are still on my must-try in great quantities list. Now, I will admit that Whistle Pig Rye is a bit out of my daily driver price range. You can find the 750 milliliter bottle for around $80 to $100, and occasionally the 375 milliliter bottle for around $50. So it's not on my pick up a few bottles for the weekend list. However, I have recently had a couple of opportunities to attend a few events where the Whistle Pig Rye was readily available, so I took it upon myself to take advantage of my host's generosity and to sample a few, several pours of the Whistle Pig Rye. At one event, a wedding rehearsal dinner, I even managed to find an out-of-the-way table, a pen, and a couple of cocktail napkins on which to take some tasting notes should my rye-addled brain not remember my thoughts about the Whistle Pig Rye. Apparently, I also took some notes later in the evening about the father of the bride's toast, which, according to my notes, was fueled by his own attention to the Whistle Pig Rye, which he had apparently been researching more aggressively than I. Thus, for the sake of transparency, I convey to you that this week's Bourbon Break was unofficially and unknowingly sponsored by the patrons of two different weddings, one of my editors, and a rather well-known tech company. Thank you for your support. As to Whistle Pig, the company itself has only been around since 2007 and has been dedicated to producing only rye whiskeys. They're a Canadian-based company who got started because, with the assistance of master distiller Dave Pickerel, who you've probably heard me talk about in other bourbon breaks because he's considered the founding father of the craft of distilling. Anyway, with the help of Pickerel, the folks at Whistle Pig bought a stock of Canadian blended whiskey and went into business. The company claims it's not focused on the past of distilling, but looking to the future of what distilling can be. The thing is, though, that the Whistle Pig Rye isn't actually distilled by Whistle Pig, and the label just identifies the rye as being hand-bottled by Whistle Pig. The rye is a continuation of that stock of Canadian rye that Pickerel helped the company purchase. So the Whistle Pig Rye is bottled by Whistle Pig, but distilled by a few other Canadian distilleries. As to the name Whistle Pig, I have to admit, I did not know this until the almighty Google ferreted out this information, and so I give credit for this information to Dram Devotees, a great blog for whiskey enthusiasts. Anyway, according to Laura Fields of Dram Devotees, the story goes that in an interview for Whiskey Cast, which appears in episode 267 of that great whiskey podcast, Pickerel was asked about the name Whistle Pig, and he told the story that Raj Bhakta, the founder of Whistle Pig, was hiking in Vale when a Frenchman on a bicycle rode up to him, stopped the bike, and asked him in a comically high-pitched voice, Could it be a Whistle Pig?" Raj answered, "A what? I don't know what you're talking about." "You know, a Whistle Pig." The man made some strange noise into his hand in an effort to be more clear, but when he realized that Raj did not understand, he got back on his bike and rode away. The event stuck with Bhakta, and he named the company Whistle Pig. Well, it turns out, and I sure didn't know this, but I guess the French did, that Whistle Pig is another name for a groundhog or a woodchuck. And when a groundhog gets scared, they make a high-pitched whistle to warn the rest of the groundhog colony of possible danger. And so, for those of you non-groundhog aficionados, now you know something about groundhogs and about the name Whistle Pig Rye. Now, personally, the idea of a groundhog so scared that it screams a high-pitched whistle seems about as un-whiskey a name as I can imagine. I want my whiskey named after a hardy, bold, daring thing, not cowardly Canadian rodents. Now I hate Puxatawny Phil even more. That bastard can extend winter and then scream in terror about it all he wants. I'm not a fan. Now the Whistle Pig Rye ethos is just shot for me. And now every time I hear someone order Whistle Pig Rye, all I'm going to think about is that screaming rodent and that whiny French guy, whiny French Guy on a bike. Not the origin story I want from a whiskey, which is a shame because the name just doesn't match the caliber of this rye. This is a 100-proof rye that's been aged 10 years in virgin American white oak and then finished in bourbon barrels. Its mash bill is easy. It's 100% rye. It's bottled in an elegant-looking bottle with some fine curved shoulders. I like the leanness of the bottle, too, and that thick base on the bottle and the distinct WP that is embossed in the glass of the back of the bottle. As to the eye of the Whistle Pig Rye, it's a very clear rye with a yellowish golden coloration, like a thin honey, like a Tupelo, acacia, or clover honey, not an orange blossom honey or a buckwheat honey, which tend to be darker and browner. Yellow and gold are the key words here. The nose of the Whistle Pig Rye is very light, but dominated by the rye spice with hints of cinnamon and clove. These are fresh smelling spices, not like some other ryes where the spice scents smell like that jar of brown powder in the back of your grandmother's spice rack that's probably been there since the 1950s. There's also some plant scent, earthy scent in the nose too, but it's vague but pleasant. The palate of the Whiskey Pig Rye is thin. There's certainly some alcohol burn and spice here, which is expected from a 100 proof spirit, but the dominant taste is the sweetness of the rye blended with cinnamon and spices and more sweet flavors like vanilla and brown sugar. Given that it's a 100 proof rye, it's rather soft for a 100 proof rye, softer than you'd expect from a rye of that proof, but it's very pleasant in the mouth. The finish is spicy, that cinnamon coming to the fore, accentuating the blend of spicy and hot, like hot candies, like Red Hots or Fireballs. There's also some memory of the charred oak barrels here, giving the finish a smoky, sweet, spicy taste. I also like how the finish lingers. Its ghost stays in your mouth for a bit, reminding you of what you've just enjoyed. It's not a long linger, but it's also not a quick finish. Think of it as a medium linger of a memory you're glad to have. So overall, this is a really enjoyable rye, and I sure did enjoy the opportunity to sample significant numbers of glasses of Whistle Pig Rye at several events. I think the one drawback for me here is the price point. Again, at 80 to $100, that makes the Whistle Pig a bit beyond my desire for regular purchases. And as I've heard some whiskey pros point out too, that's a high price point for an outsourced spirit. Nonetheless, WP is certainly an enjoyable rye, and it's certainly a rye that I will eagerly ask for when someone else is picking up my tab. And those are my thoughts about Whistle Pig 10-year-old rye. And as always, before we go, and as a final note, my regular disclaimer, please keep in mind that the Fishing Professor Bourbon Breaks reviews are not sponsored. The distillers have not sent me samples, nor do they influence my reviews at all, though I am always open to sponsorship, bribery, and extortion. The whiskeys I review are purchased out of pocket, except clearly this one because somebody else bought these for me out of kindness and generosity. My reviews are based on the keen sense of whiskey know-how that I have developed over many years in many of this country's finest watering holes, drinking establishments, dives, pubs, honky-tonks, and back alley speakeasies. Hey, speaking of, let me give a quick shout out to the Carousel Bar and Lounge on Royal Street, New Orleans, a funky little bar with a lot of history. I think it's been there for about 70, 75 years or so. And indeed, as the name suggests, the bar itself is shaped like a carousel, giving the place a carnival-esque ambiance, which makes perfect sense for New Orleans. It's a vibrant place worth sitting and slow sipping a cocktail or three. And like Mark Twain said, here's to the big bull in the wood. He does the cows and heifers good. And if it weren't for his long, long rod, then what will we do for beef, by God? As always, if you've got comments about this week's Bourbon Break, feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com. Let's get back to casting. Okay, my dudes and dudettes, it's time for this week's top 10. And this week, I want to look at my top 10 plugs for redfish. But before we do, let me clear the air a bit because let's face it, the word plugs can mean a lot of things. So I want to define my terms before I start counting them down. I'm going to operate with the idea that a plug is a hard-bodied fishing lure. Oh, man, why did saying that just suddenly remind me of that 1984 teen romp of a movie, Hard Bodies, a movie by its own admission that was a movie with absolutely no social value whatsoever. Sorry, mental time warp there. Anyway, plugs are hard-bodied lures. They can be crankbaits, topwater baits, shallow diving, deep diving, and so on. So really for this top 10, we're talking about any hard bait used to target redfish. However, since back in episode 1.7, the one with Dale Stewart from Seether, I counted down my top 10 topwater lures for reds. So I don't see the need to repeat that or integrate that list into this list. And so for this review, I'm going to count down my top 10 subsurface plugs for redfish. Now, before I get to the countdown, I think we need a little professorial moment. Certainly, humans have been fishing and using fishing lures way back into prehistoric times when we started fishing. But when it comes to the innovation of the plug, conventional wisdom credits James Hedden with developing the idea of the plug back in the late 19th century. The way the story goes is that Hedden was sitting by a pond whittling a piece of wood, which he then tossed into the pond. When he did, a bass slammed the whittled wood. I guess Hedden had an epiphanal moment akin to the one that our folklore tells us that Isaac Newton had when he saw an apple fall from a tree and he was able to formulate gravitational theory based on that moment. Well, Hedden started experimenting with different shaped carved pieces of wood and developed the Lucky 13 lure. That's a lure design that's still manufactured by Hedden and sold worldwide. Hedden, of course, is the oldest fishing lure manufacturer in the world, producing lures now for over 100 years, including the iconic Hedden Zara Spook, which, by the way, is a fantastic topwater plug for reds. And yeah, it's a plug, but it's a topwater, so it's not on today's top 10 plug list. So the idea of the plug came from using a plug of wood as a lure. And for some bonus knowledge, keep in mind that the technical definition of a plug of wood is a slightly tapered, elongated, rounded peg. So basically the shape of most plug lures. Anyway, now you know the story of the innovation of the plug, and we can account for the term, plus it's kind of a generic umbrella term for lots of kinds of lures. So let's get to my top 10 plugs for targeting redfish. And keep in mind, there are literally thousands of other plugs out there that would work great on redfish. Even the companies that I'll name here make many other plugs besides the ones I'm pointing to. So realistically, this is like a Hall of Fame list. And being on this top 10 list is basically me saying, these are the best of the best of the best, as far as I'm concerned, at least. All right, let's start at number 10 by going long and throwing a bomb. The Bomber saltwater grade mullet. This is a slow sinking twitch bait lure that is just ideal for redfish and just about any other inshore species. I love the unique body design that embodies that classic tapered plug body, but that has this unique arch to it, giving it a fantastic action in the water. The hardware is also super strong and designed for saltwater conditions. I love the split rings on the rigging eye and the split ring replaceable hooks. There are about 8 color variations, but for redfish, I like the gold, black, orange belly and the spot tail pogey version. I also love that these lures are labeled mullet down the side of the lure, as if to make sure the fish understands what they're looking at. The Bomber mullet is a 3.5-inch lure. It weighs 5 1/8 of an ounce. Also, Bomber saltwater grade mullet are some of the most reasonably priced lures out there, and the mullet go for about $6 a piece. Do keep in mind that Bomber does make a topwater version of these mullet, which are also awesome, but for this top 10, I'm thinking about the slow sinking versions. At number 9, I want to give props to Nomad Designs Mascad 95 slow sinking lure. Note that there are a lot of different sizes among the Mascad line of lures, and for reds, I recommend the 95, which is a 3 3/4-inch lure that weighs 3/4 of an ounce. There are other versions that go up to 6 inches in length. These can be great too on bigger reds, but for most fish, I like the smaller version. Also, there are suspending models and slow sink models. Both are great for reds, but I prefer the slow sink just because you can keep the lure moving more than you would with the suspending version. Also, if you haven't looked at the Mascad catalog of colors, you should. They have some innovative takes on classic color patterns and some dynamic original patterns too. I will always like a redhead white body for redfish, and the Nomad Design take on this classic, the Fireball redhead, is fantastic. I also find great luck with their natural mullet pattern and their olive black shad. The one drawback of the Mascad, though, is the price point. You can find these lures as low as $10, but most are listed at 15 to 20 a piece. In the number 8 position, I've got one of my favorite search baits, which also happens to be one of my favorite redfish baits, and I'm talking about Unfair Lures Arrowhead. You've probably heard me talk about the great lures that Paul Van Reenen designs for Unfair Lures, and among those, I have grown quite fond of the Arrowhead. Its unique design makes it a phenomenal distance casting lure, and its retrieval action is comparable to a walk the dog action, but underwater. It's more of a shallow water or just subsurface lure, and it runs best in depths between 1 foot and 3 feet down. I love that the arrowhead rigging eye comes with a barrel swivel rather than a fixed place eye or a split ring, letting the lure move more freely. And the swivel prevents the spinning and prevents spinning and line knotting. Of course, like most of the Unfair lures, the arrowhead has Unfair's patented 3D bleeding gills, which is a kind of marabou or flashabou that's built into the lure and gives the visual impression of an injured and bleeding fish. Unique, too, to the arrowhead, as well as some of the other Unfair lures, is the transverse barb-styled hook. The arrowhead measures in at 2.7 inches and weighs half an ounce. That makes it ideal for casting line in the range of 8 to 20-pound class. They come in about 16 or so colors. I'm a big fan of the pinfish, the menhaden, the pearl olive, and the pearl gold when targeting reds. At number 7, let's throw Rapala's X-Rap into the mix. The X-Rap, of course, is a diverse lure that comes in a variety of models, but I'm talking here specifically about the X-Rap Saltwater series, and even there we need to think of the X-Rap name as an umbrella term for a lot of lures that includes everything from topwater poppers like the X-Rap Magnum Explode to trolling lures like the X-Rap Magnum. But for plugs for reds, I'm a fan of the X-Rap Twitching Minnow. This slow sinking lure has the action of a subsurface walk the dog retrieve. Its slow sinking design also allows you to get the lure down to where reds tend to feed. The X-Rap Twitching Minnow comes in a 4.5 ounce model and a 4 3/4 inch model. Excuse me. The X-Rap Twitching Minnow comes in a 4-inch half-ounce model and a 4 3/4 inch model that weighs in at just a hair under 1 ounce. It's 15/16 of an ounce to be exact. Like I said, this is a slow sink lure, and it sinks well on the pause and on the retrieve. It runs at depths of 1 to 2 feet, which is great when fishing skinny water for reds. I'm also a big fan of the fact that it comes rigged with VMC Coastal Black one-time X inline hook, single hooks, rather than with twin treble hooks, as a lot of plugs do. Given the attention to catch and release with reds, I like the single hook over the treble hook for releasing fish easier and with less damage. All right, at number 6, you've probably heard me tout its virtue in other top 10s. I'm a big fan of Bagley's Rattling Finger Mullet. I fell in love with Bagley's Finger Mullet more than 25 years ago, and now the company has upgraded the mullet into an even more effective lure. The old model was made of balsa wood, but the reimagined version has a hard plastic body that's so much more durable. There are 9 color options available in 2 sizes. Oh, and if you want to learn more about Bagley's Rattling Finger Mullet, be sure to check out my review of these lures over at inventivefishing.com or on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. The review's got some pretty interesting stuff about the history of Bagley lures as well. Now keep in mind that Bagley's makes both the topwater version of the Rattling Finger Mullet and a sinking model. Both are great, but when I'm aiming at reds, it's that sinking model I go to. As always, I'm a fan of their classic redhead, but I have to say that the silver mullet, the natural mullet, and the copper mullet all work great for reds. Sitting in the 5 golden rings position, I'm going to give props to a classic lure, an iconic lure, a lure that every saltwater angler ought to have in their tackle boxes and probably has had them and relied on them for 25 years or more, and that's MirrOlure's 52MR. This is a legend of a lure. These may be the most durable lures out there. These iconic red eyes on these things, the flash of the lures, this all makes visual attractant of the highest quality. Of course, the triple treble hook makes this lure that's nearly impossible to miss a hookup. I love that the rigging eye sits atop of the head rather at the nose, giving the lure that head-down swimming action. This is a fantastic lure for fishing skinny water. This is a lure I've been using successfully for decades in all sorts of inshore scenarios, particularly when targeting reds. So yeah, indeed, the MirrOlure 52MR. Okay, at number 4, I'm going to turn my attention to Yo-Zuri's 3D Inshore series of lures, but I'm going to highlight the 3D Inshore Twitch bait as a fantastic redfish plug. This is a slow-sinking, lipless bait that has great balance. That slow-sinking action and balance make it great for skinny water, particularly around grass and structure like oyster bars. This is a lure with great visual appeal, and the flash in these bodies is really reflective to draw the fish's attention to the bait. Yo-Zuri names this reflective quality an internal hologram sheet. The lure's body is a great mimic of a bait fish body, And the action adheres to that mimicry as the lure swims with great darting action, and it drops slowly on the paws and reacts well to the twitch, holding its upright position with a great rolling swim. They come in 4 sizes, ranging from 2 3/4 inch model at 1/4 of an ounce up to a 5 1/4 inch model at 1 3/4 ounces. That's a pretty big lure. They are available in 18 color patterns, but for reds, my favorite, in addition to a traditional redhead, are the mullet, the gold black, and the peanut bunker, though really, I don't think there's a color pattern in this palette that wouldn't be effective for targeting reds. All right, in the number 3 position, I want to get at that great lure from Unfair Lures, the Rip and Slash Slow Suspend. Now, I've been pretty upfront in the past about my respect for what Paul Van Reenen has done with Unfair Lures, like I mentioned a moment ago about the Arrowhead, and the designs he's offered through Unfair. So putting the Rip and Slash at my number 3 position seems warranted. Now, as is the case with a lot of other lures in this list, the Rip and Slash comes in a couple of models, including a floating topwater version, but for this countdown, I'm talking about the Slow Suspend model, which comes in 2 sizes, a 70 millimeter and a 90 millimeter. The Rip and Slash mold is designed to mimic a cigar minnow. It features the patented 3D bleeding gill feature, which I said already is a kind of marabou or flashabou that's molded into the gill area. It's got great eyes. I also really like how Van Reenen incorporates transverse hooks into a lot of these lures, like I mentioned before about the Arrowhead. This lure is designed for shallow water in depths of 1 to 5 feet. Unlike a lot of other plugs I've talked about here too, the Rip and Slash has a dorsal and anal fin in the design, giving the lure a really hydrodynamic swimming movement. Okay, in the bridesmaid position, the number 2, the runner-up, I want to go to a newer bait that I'm absolutely loving to fish for with reds, and that's the Berkley Juke. This is a really dynamic lure that Berkley just released a few months ago. It's a lipped crankbait style lure that has a coffin-shaped bill that really accentuates the darting action of the lure with little effort from the angler. I'm intrigued by the flat side shad-shaped body and how it moves in the water. It responds to the twitch on the retrieve really well and has a good lifelike motion on the retrieve. It's a really responsive lure. It's also got great flash to it for visual stimulation. This lure, in fact, really does have that wooden plug feel to it, like a classic lure, but it's a plastic lure and a really rugged plastic at that. It comes in 2 sizes, a 3 3/4 inch version at 3/8 of an ounce and a 4-inch version at 11/16 of an ounce. It's available in 14 color variations, including one called redfish. I've hit some pretty big reds with the mullet pattern, the new penny pattern, and the mangrove minnow patterns. So that brings us to my number 1 plug for targeting redfish. Before I let you in on that secret, though, here's a quick recap. Number 10, Bomber Saltwater Grade Mullet. Number 9, Nomad Design, Mascad 95 Slow Sinking. At 8, the Unfair Arrowhead. At 7, Rapala's X-Rap Twitchin' Minnow. At 6, Bagley's Rattlin' Finger Mullet. At 5, Mirror 52 MR. At 4, Yozuri's Inshore Twitch Bait. At 3, we're back again to Unfair and their Rip and Slash So Suspend. Notice that Unfair is the only company to make 2 of the top 10 positions this week. At number 2, Berkley's Juke. And that leaves us with just 1 left, and 1 is the loneliest number that I've ever heard, unless you're number 1 in the Fishing Professor's top 10, in which case you're probably Mirrorlure's Mirrodine, and Mirrorlure enters with its 2nd list in the top 10 for this week. This is my absolute favorite plug for targeting fish, and from what I've seen and heard, I'm not the only one who thinks so. The Mirrodine is a suspending twitch bait that comes in about 30 color options and a few variations by series, like the CI Pro series, the Broken Glass series, and the Skin series. And for whatever reason, I will say that the Mirrodine Skin series seems to perform better than the others when the water starts to cool off. The Mirrodine comes in 3 sizes, a 2 5/8 inch model at 3/8 of an ounce, a 3 1/8 inch model at 1 ounce, and a 3 3/4 inch 9/16 of an ounce version. This is a lipless twitch bait that has a great baitfish profile. It's also a rattling bait, so between the visual of the profile, the eyes, the colors for visual attractant, the audio attractant qualities of the Mirrodine are great too. With all sincerity, the Miradyne really is my favorite plug for targeting reds. That's not to take away from the quality and excellence of the other plugs in this top 10 because they're all fantastic lures too, but I really am a fan of the Miradyne. And that brings us to the close of another Fishing Professor's Top 10 list. And of course, just a reminder that my top 10s are not sponsored, so no one is buying a ticket for this bus ride. It's all about what I really fish with and what I really find to be effective. That's not to say that my favor can't be bought. And for a few measly $100,000, your lure can conveniently make the top 10 as well. Of course, if you have a kind of tackle you'd like me to count down on a future top 10, feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com to make a suggestion. Tune in next week for another informative and unfettered top 10 list. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode. Once more into the breach, my friends. I want to thank Jose Chavez for that great conversation about Z-Man. I do hope you found my pontifications about Whistle Pig Rye to be of some value to you and your hedgehog. I hope my countdown of my top 10 plugs for redfish inspired you to think about what redfish lures you find most effective. Before I sign off today, I do have a message for our brothers and sisters out there behind the line. The crabs are in the pot. I say again, the crabs are in the pot. And that just about does it for this week's episode of the Fishing Professor Rodcast. Be sure to look for next week's episode on Wednesday, and I hope you and all the members of my listening crew, even Pip the cabin boy, I hope you'll all be spreading the word about the Rodcast. And of course, if you have comments or questions about anything on this week's show or have recommendations for future top 10s, Bourbon Breaks, interviews, or information about specific fishing-related issues, please feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com or leave a reply in any of the comment sections for any of the podcast platforms you use to listen to the Rodcast. Be sure to follow Inventive Fishing on Twitter, Instagram, and friend us on Facebook at Inventive Fishing. And be sure to check out all the great video content over on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. Hey, love, peace, and chicken grease. I'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, this is Sid Dobrin, the Fishing Professor. Fish on.
The Fishing Professor Show is copyrighted by Inventive Fishing, LLC. Any rebroadcast of the podcast without the consent from Inventive Fishing, LLC is strictly prohibited. Fish on!